Africa has started this decade powerfully, with coups being common, especially in the western part of the continent, and there's no sign that it'll be stopping, as we recently had 2 coup attempts in 2 African countries in just 3 days. In today's video, we'll be taking you through the coups and coup attempts that have taken place in Africa since 2020. There are interesting stories in this video, like that of Burkina Faso, a gold-rich country that was once led by the legendary Thomas Sankara, who was taken out by his close friend with the help of France. However, many in Burkina Faso and Africa believe that Thomas Sankara has resurrected and returned in the person of Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But what makes Ibrahim Traoré special? Make sure you watch this video till the end so you get the full story. Also, like this video, leave your comments below, subscribe to the new tourist channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos. Of the 494 attempted or successful coups carried out around the world since 1950, Africa has seen 222, the most of any region, with 109 of them successful. In the past 3 years, there has been a noticeable surge in coups across Africa, with military leaders seizing power in Gabon, Niger, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Guinea, Chad, and Mali. Out of 54 countries on the African continent, 45 have had at least 1 coup attempt since 1950. 21 of the 27 coups in sub-Saharan Africa since 1990 have occurred in former French colonies. This means that 16 successful coups have occurred within former French colonies since 1990. Some say that France's extensive interference in the internal affairs of its former colonies is a major factor in the prominence of Francophone coups. Now let's look at the coups in Africa since 2020. 1. Chad. On April 20, 2021, Chad experienced a violent coup that resulted in the death of the country's president, Idriss Déby, who had been in power for over 30 years. Déby had just won a 6th term in office in a highly contested election marred by allegations of fraud. His regime had been facing increasing discontent from the public due to issues like poverty, corruption, and human rights violations. Rebel groups, particularly the Front for Change and Concord in Chad, had also been gaining momentum in the north of the country. All these led to the coup. Although the law stipulates that the Speaker of the Parliament should ascend to the presidency, the Chadian army, led by President Idriss Déby's son, Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno, dissolved parliament on the pretext of ensuring stability, announced a transitional military council, and declared himself in charge of the country. Mahamat was reappointed in October 2022 for a further 2-year transition term, despite having promised to return control to civilians through elections after 18 months. The power transfer, which was widely seen as unconstitutional, resulted in disturbances in the capital, N'Djamena. In early January, the government announced the arrest of 10 officers and a human rights activist, Baradine Berdi Targio, presented as the mastermind of an attempt to destabilize the constitutional order and institutions of the republic. The 11 men were sentenced to 20 years in prison. They were convicted of undermining the constitutional order, illegal possession of weapons, and criminal association. On December 17, more than 8 million Chadians will vote in a referendum on a new constitution. But the ballot seems to be going in General Mahamat Idriss Déby Itno's favor simply because the government has not respected the recommendation of the National Dialogue to let the people choose the form of state. 2. Burkina Faso. In January 2022, the Burkina Army deposed President Roch Kabore and suspended the nation's constitution and National Assembly. Military leaders claimed he had failed to stop widespread violence. Despite promises by coup leader Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba that he would improve the situation, violence spiraled. As a result, military forces launched a second coup in less than a year, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré latched onto power in September after an alleged mutiny. The 35-year-old charismatic Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who is leading Burkina Faso's transitional government, has faced coup attempts to take him out since he seized power on September 20, 2022. Some believe that France is working tirelessly to bring him because he's been working against the interest of France and for the good of the Burkinabe and the development and sovereignty of Burkina Faso. Although there's no clear evidence to prove this, it's not something to rule out because France and other Western countries have always been working to keep Africa poor and in suffering by installing puppet leaders in the country to control them as they plunder resources. Burkina Faso's military government said its intelligence and security services had thwarted a coup attempt in September 2023. Officers and other alleged actors involved in this attempt were arrested, and others were actively sought. It was suspected that Ibrahim Traore's chief of staff collected over 25 million euros to betray Traore. Again, there's no evidence for these claims as of now. Since taking power, Captain Traore has moved to cut ties with France and sided with Russia. He ordered French forces based in the country to help tackle the Islamist insurgency to leave and launched mass recruitment drives to reinforce the security forces. Burkina Faso also removed French as its official language and asked the French ambassador to Burkina Faso leave the country. Burkina Faso closed its embassy in Paris and asked senior UN officials to leave Burkina Faso. Traore has been clear that he is not the enemy of the French people, but he is fighting against the parasitic French policies that are keeping his people poor. He has launched so many development projects in Burkina Faso and launched a gold refinery for the country's gold. 3. Sierra Leone. In Sierra Leone, a group of unidentified troops broke into the major ammunition storage at the Wilberforce barracks, took heavy weaponry, and tried to remove President Julius Maada Bio. This resulted in heavy gunfire and widespread chaos. The armed group then made their way to the Pedemba Road prisons, where they then freed the prisoners, many of whom had been locked up for several years without trial, including political prisoners. It is unclear exactly how many prisoners were released, but videos shared on social media show several people fleeing from the area of Freetown's central Pedemba Road prison. Later, President Julius Maada Bio announced that the majority of the attack's commanders had been taken into custody. He called the incidents a breach of security and an attack on democracy. He refrained from referring to them as a coup attempt. He added that everything was back to normal, but he did not say who the perpetrators were or what their intentions were. Former Sierra Leonean President Ernest Bai Koroma has been placed under house supervision in what the opposition say is house arrest following the recent violence. Koroma is considered as one of the suspects for the attempted coup. 4. Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissau has a long history of political instability, with numerous coups and coup attempts since gaining independence in 1974. On February 1, 2023, heavily armed soldiers surrounded the government palace in Guinea-Bissau's capital, Bissau, in what appeared to be an attempt to overthrow the government. Guinea-Bissau President Umaro Sissoko Embalo confirmed that the gunfire and clashes that had erupted in the capital of the West African nation on that fateful day were an attempted coup. The same scenario happened on February 1, 2022, and Embalo has promised to put an end once and for all to these upheavals in Guinea-Bissau. 5. Gabon. We cannot talk of all these coups without mentioning the coup in Gabon. Since independence from France in 1960, Gabon has primarily been ruled by the Bongo family, starting with President Omar Bongo in 1967 and following his death in 2009 by his son Ali Bongo Ondimba. Ali Bongo was re-elected in an election in 2016, which prompted a failed coup attempt in 2019. On 30 August 2023, a coup occurred in Gabon, shortly after the announcement that incumbent President Ali Bongo Ondimba had won the general election held on 26 August. Many say that the coup brought an end to the 56-year-long rule of the Bongo family over Gabon. However, the coup was led by Ali Bongo's cousin. It was also the 8th successful coup to occur in West and Central Africa since 2020. Meanwhile, from detention in his residence, Bongo appealed in a video statement to foreign allies, imploring them to make noise on his and his family's behalf. He said he did not know what was happening. Hundreds of people celebrated the military's intervention in the streets of the Gabonese capital Libreville. However, many Africans believe that the coup in Gabon is just a ploy to keep the Bongo family in power as Ali Bongo's health is deteriorating. After the coup in Gabon, some presidents decided to reshuffle their cabinets, thinking the military might play a fast one on them. President Paul Kagame retired hundreds of soldiers, coinciding with the advancement of young soldiers within the nation's security framework. New generals were also appointed to lead army divisions situated across the country. The Rwanda Defense Force released a statement disclosing Kagame's approval of the retirement of 12 generals, 83 senior officers, and 6 junior officers. Cameroon's President Paul Biya also enacted fresh appointments within the Defense Ministry's Central Administrative Unit. 6. Guinea. In 2021, the commander of the country's special forces, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, deposed President Alpha Condé. A year before, Condé had amended the constitution to circumvent limits that barred him from pushing for a third term, leading to disturbances. After becoming the interim president, Doumbouya pledged a path to democratic elections in 3 years. However, ECOWAS intervened to push forward the timeline, imposing sanctions on those with ties to the military junta, who in January 2023 proposed a 2-year transition, a move derided by the opposition. 7. Sudan. In its modern history, Sudan has experienced nearly 35 coups, making the country a laboratory of coups. Of these attempted military takeovers, 6 were successful, while 12 failed and 17 were foiled in advance. In 2019, Omar al-Bashir, who had seized power in a military coup in 1989, was deposed from power after protests. Most recently, the Sudanese Armed Forces General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo interrupted Sudan's progress towards democratic rule by instigating another coup in October 2021, which terminated Sudan's transitional civilian government and returned the country to military rule. The ongoing civil war, which erupted in mid-April 2023 between the Sudanese Armed Forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, is partly influenced by this political legacy, where power is accessed and transferred through force rather than elections. The two leaders had previously worked together, toppling the al-Bashir regime in 2019 and orchestrating a military coup in October 2021 that removed the civilian prime minister and cabinet and suspended the constitution. But after the SAF, RSF, and civilian political leaders agreed to a new framework for a democratic transition in December, questions emerged over how the RSF would be integrated into the SAF, as well as over who would assume leadership of the newly consolidated military. Negotiations to resolve the issue stalled, and tensions quickly rose between al-Burhan and Hemedti in the weeks leading up to the current violence. 8. Mali. In August 2020, a group of Mali's top army brass, led by Assimi Goïta, deposed President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. It followed protests over allegations of increasing insecurity and disputed legislative elections. On September 20, 2020, the coup leaders appointed civilians, Ba Ndaw as president and Mokhtar Ouane as prime minister. Goïta was appointed vice president. Goïta was given the power to decide on ministerial positions in the new government. This allowed the military to virtually control the civilian government. Relations between the civilians and military became tense over the next few months. The Islamic insurgency in the north was raging. Thousands had been killed and tens of thousands displaced from their homes. On May 24, 2021, the military acted again. Ndaw and Ouane were arrested by the military. They later resigned their posts and were released from custody. Assimi Goïta, one of the main coup leaders, was sworn in as interim president of Mali on June 7, 2021. In February 2022, amid pressure from its West African neighbors, the military junta agreed to cede control to a civilian-led interim government who would handle an 18-month transition to democratic elections. The Economic Community of West African States, which had imposed sanctions on Mali after the coup, removed some sections of the sanctions in 2022 after the coup leaders put forward a 2-year transition plan to democracy and a new electoral law, under which the country is expected to hold a presidential election in 2024. Mali has removed French as its official language. The interim government in Mali also asked the French and the UN to leave Mali. Mali even reported France to the UN Security Council for sponsoring terrorism in Mali. 9. Niger. The July 26 coup in the West African nation of Niger marks the 9th attempt to seize power in around the last 3 years in Western and Central Africa. The July 26 saw French ally President Mohamed Bazoum removed from power by General Abdourahmane Chiani. The Niger military leaders asked all French troops and the French ambassador to leave Niger. They also kicked out a senior UN official. Niger increased its uranium price by 400% at the discomfort of France that had been exploiting the resource at 400% below the global market price. The military leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have stood firm against French oppression, neocolonialism, and working hard to kick the French out of their countries. These 3 countries signed a mutual defense pact to protect each other in case of invasion and to collectively fight against the jihadist insurgents in the Sahel. They're planning to form a confederation with one currency. So, what do Africans think of these coups? Many Africans see these coups as a response to long-standing frustrations with corrupt or authoritarian regimes. They view them as a necessary evil to remove leaders who have failed to improve their lives or address their concerns. This sentiment is often fueled by economic hardship, a lack of basic services, and limited political participation. Others fear the destabilizing effects of coups, highlighting the potential for violence, human rights abuses, and economic setbacks. They advocate for peaceful transitions of power through democratic processes and respect for the rule of law. This perspective emphasizes the importance of long-term stability and institutional strengthening for sustainable development. It's important to note that African perspectives on coups are not static. With increasing access to information and a growing awareness of democratic values, expectations for governance are evolving. This is reflected in the growing calls for accountability and transparency, as well as the demand for peaceful and inclusive political processes. However, some Africans are sure that these coups will lead to change. French influence has loomed large over its former colonies in West and Central Africa, well after the era of independence from foreign rule. But now Paris appears to be facing a reckoning in the region, triggered by military takeovers in several of its former colonies. Ruling military leaders in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have expelled French troops and ambassadors, drastically reducing Paris' role in a region-wide fight against insurgents linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. The coup that ousted President Mohamed Bazoum in Niger alarmed many in West Africa, Europe, and the United States. Niger had been a key security partner for the Western governments that used the landlocked West African country as a base in the fight against Islamic insurgents in the Sahel. Observers say there are concerns that a new, and potentially dangerous, dynamic in the Sahel could hurt counterterrorism efforts there and boost Russian influence in the region. In fact, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have sided more with Russia as they've gone into security and development agreements with Russia while canceling France. Bear in mind that among all these coups, Niger stands out. Why do we say this? Niger is now the 4th fastest growing economy in the world after kicking out France and increasing uranium prices by 400%. Ibrahim Traoré stands out among the coup leaders because of the things he has been doing in his country. The 35-year-old president is a charismatic leader who is popular with the Burkina people and other Africans. This makes him a threat to France's influence in the country, which has been traditionally based on its support for older and more established leaders. After his trip to Russia in July, Traoré received a grand welcome from thousands of Burkina Faso citizens who had lined up on the streets of Ouagadougou. The people love him and are happy with the things he has done in less than a year. Though the jihadist attacks are still frequent, the people have faith in him and are hoping for a better country. It is like Traoré is trying to prove a point to the French. He is trying to show them that Burkina Faso can survive without them. Ibrahim Traoré has been keeping to his promise of transforming the country and ensuring a better life for his people. He has already launched and embarked on multiple developmental projects, as well as following up with projects that were launched before he rose to power. Some of these projects include the modernization of roads, the construction of Ouagadougou Airport, the starting up of multiple entrepreneurship programs, and many others. While others think that the coups that happened in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are coups, some people argue that the coup in Gabon looks fishy. Why is this so? This is because the military government's new leader, General Brice Clotaire Oligui Nguema, is Bongo's cousin and commander-in-chief of the Gabonese Republican Guard, the country's most powerful security force. The Bongo family has ruled Gabon for over 56 years. So if his cousin is taking over as the new leader, what difference does it make? It is also said that General Nguema was extremely close to Bongo Sr. He served the autocrat until Omar Bongo's death in 2009. Are these coups going a long way to develop these countries? This question is coming up because most of these countries have had an increase in terrorist attacks after the coups, but their economies seem to be taking off. This makes many people believe that Western powers do not want these developing nations to have stability. Restoring security was the main justification used by coup leaders in Burkina Faso and Mali when they seized power. However, Assimi Goïta and Ibrahim Traoré have been doing a lot to fight these terrorists and ensure the development of their various countries. As of now, we are not certain if this will be an end to the coups going on in Africa, but there are some important things to consider. Countries facing ongoing challenges like poverty, corruption, and weak institutions are more vulnerable to coups. If a significant portion of the population feels unheard or neglected by their leaders, it can create fertile ground for discontent and potential uprisings. However, investments in transparent governance, independent judiciaries, and free and fair elections can bolster democratic legitimacy and make coups less appealing. The decade of coups may have left scars, but it can also serve as a wake-up call. By addressing the underlying issues and embracing genuine reforms, Africa can forge a future where coups become a relic of the past, replaced by a flourishing continent where democracy and prosperity thrive. Remember, the future of Africa is not predetermined. It is shaped by the choices we make today. Let us choose hope over despair, action over apathy, and unity over division. Only then can we truly build an Africa where coups are a distant memory and the promise of a brighter future that shines for all. Do you think more coups are still to happen in Africa? What can be done to prevent this? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the New Tourist channel. Turn on notifications so you get notified whenever we upload videos like this. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.